Well, folks, we're up to one of the most tumultuous years in my life. We made a move from the coast of Washington to wheat country, and I would be stuck there for the next 5 years. And that is where everything began in earnest. Albums, 45s, cassettes. I even had a few 8-tracks, but of course, this is only about vinyl. There was all kinds of different music on the radio, from pop to disco to country, a little bit of everything, and some of which you probably never heard of, and that's par for the course for me. The year was 1976. I'm T.C. Kirkham. This is Vinyl Recall. ABC, TC here, TC Kirkham, the Kirkham Report. Welcome to Vinyl Recall. This is my version of Vinyl Richie's top 10 albums of every year. I do it as a show so I can comment on things and talk about the various albums I pick out. We're up to 1976, and that year was a very tumultuous year for me. I started my year, as I said last week, on 1975 in an area of the Key Peninsula in Washington State called Lakebay. 3 months later, in March, just before my birthday, actually, in March of 1976, we moved lock, stock, and barrel to wheat country, Harrington, Washington, which was 50 miles southwest of Spokane, and I would be stuck there for the next 5 years. Mom was always, we have to do things right now, right now, right now. Even though when we moved, she didn't have a job, she didn't have anything for sure ready. But her friend from there, because we had lived there twice before in my lifetime, once when I was a baby and once when I was in kindergarten, that it would be the best place for us. I started collecting in earnest and really got into my collection and into music in general while I was there, because I was a loner, didn't hang out with a lot of people, and had a lot of different tastes. Most of the kids in Harrington were into heavy, heavy metal. I was into disco and pop stars and teen idols. So it was a lot different in many ways. 1976, there was a lot of different music on the charts, and you're going to see run the gamut as we go through my top 10. Now, before we go into the top 10, let me say that one of my favorite albums of 1976 is not on this list because I do not have it on vinyl. I only have it on CD, and believe it or not, I have it on 8-track. In fact, I had the 8-track first. I only got the CD maybe 5 or 6 years ago because I missed hearing it all the time. And that is Frampton Comes Alive from Peter Frampton. Love that album. Always have loved that album. It was great. I would pop the 8-track in my stereo and just let it play over and over again while I did homework, while I wrote, while I did all kinds of stuff. It became my soundtrack for most of the summer of 78. I didn't get it until then, but I had the singles from the album in 76, and it came out in 76, so that's why it would have counted. I also never had the full albums of two other classic albums that were released in 1976. I do not have the full album, Hotel California by the Eagles. I only have the singles, and the same is also, can be said, for another album that year that was very popular with people, and that was Boston's debut album. I also had singles, but no album of Songs of the Key of Life from Stevie Wonder. All three great albums. I've listened to the whole albums, of course, but I don't own them on vinyl. I don't even own those on CD. And so they're not on this list. What I have picked is an eclectic mix of stuff that made me happy, that I was listening to, and to be damned, everybody else in Harrington. Because most of this stuff did come out while I lived there. Let's get started with an album that probably nobody's heard of. It is a soundtrack from a Saturday morning kids show that they tried to do in the fall of 1976 on NBC. It lasted, I think it ran 3 weeks in September before they pulled it and didn't run it again until the spring of 77, by which point I had the album. I caught one episode of the show and thought it was absolutely dorky, but the music was great. It was produced by Don Kirshner, executive producer, And a lot of people don't know the show, and I bet none of the actors either, because I don't think any of them actually did anything else big. But the music was really good, and I enjoyed it a lot. It's very classic pop, um, radio pop, in the similar vein as the Archies or any other made-for-TV band like the Partridge Family. This is the Kids from Caper at number 10. Caper stood for Civilian Authority for the Protection of Everybody Regardless. Steve Bonino on the, over here, Cozy Costa, John Lansing, and Biff Warren were the stars. John Lansing and Steve Bonino did most of the singing. It's a great album. Some of the songs were written by Phil and Mitch Margo, which I loved. Rob Hegel also wrote some stuff. Neil Sedaka, Howard Greenfield, Ron Dante, and others. When It Hit Me, the Hurricane song, Tit for Tat, I Want to Love You, Fun in the Jungle, Say It, Like a Hero in the Movies, Rockets and Stars, Lullaby Girl, Everybody Loves Her, Riding a Rainbow, and Wrap Up All My Dreams. I played this all the time when I was a kid. I got it from Columbia House. Wouldn't have been able to find it in Spokane. And love the song Like a Hero in the Movies, because it's a very cool song. That was written by Phil and Mitch Margo of the Tokens, who also, were producers of Tony Orlando and Dawn and Sneakers and Lace and Christy and Jimmy McNichol over the years. This album was produced by Jay Siegel and Wally Gold. It did not come, unfortunately, with a lyric sleeve, and it is on Kirshner Records. There's a surprise, since Don Kirshner was executive producer. But it was a great album, great pop stuff. If you like the Partridge Family, if you like the Cowsills, if you like anything like that, your chances are good you're going to like the songs on this album. Even though the show was, it was dorky and it was for kids, and that's what it was. At the time I was 13, 12 and 13, 12? 12 and 13. So when I had this album, I was 13, and I enjoyed it. I didn't really like the show. I didn't care for it. But the music was great. Number 10, The Kids from Caper from 1976. Number 9 is going to shock people because it's so low. I've often said, and in fact fans have often said, that this is the least favorite of theirs. But there are some real gems on the album, and I could not leave it off because there are a couple of my favorite songs by them on this album. Number 9 from 1976, Carpenters and a Kind of Hush. This is not their best album. It's a good album. It's not a great album. There's some other great stuff on it. It does have the great lyrics and picture in the inner sleeve. There's a Kind of Hush, You, Sandy, Goofus, Can't Smile Without You, I Need to Be in Love, One More Time, Boat to Sail, I Have You, and Breaking Up Is Hard to Do. Love their cover of Breaking Up Is Hard to Do. It's really great. But the songs I really like on here were album tracks for the most part. They did the original Can't Smile Without You before Barry Manilow made it a hit with a live version about 18 months after this came out. Their cover of A Kind of Hush was great. But Sandy and Boat to Sail, both album tracks, are two of my favorite album tracks by Carpenters. And I love Goofus, which was written in the 1930s, was a single. It peaked at number 56, I think it was. Great song. Overall, I Need to Be in Love, Karen considered her favorite Carpenters single. I was never that fond of it. I liked it, but it was a little too laid back compared to even their earlier laid back stuff for me. Overall, like I said, it's a good album. Considering 4 of their albums, or 5 of their albums, have placed number 1 on my list, to have it way down at number 9 is quite interesting, but there it is, number 9 for 1976, Carpenters and A Kind of Hush. Number 8, I happen to love this album. I think it's given the shaft by some people. His fans love it. And I have been an unabashed fan of his, as I've said on the influencers I did about him last year. To me, he's simply one of the best songwriters ever. Love his singers. Love his singing as well. He doesn't take the best pictures in the world, and this album cover is proof of it. Number 8, Barry Manilow, This One's For You. I mean, really, Barry? What were you thinking there? What were the publicists thinking? There's the back cover. This includes This One's For You, the studio version of Daybreak, again a live version from his live album in '77 would would be a big hit. You Ought to Be Home with Me, Jump Shout Boogie, Weekend in New England, Riders to the Stars, Let Me Go, Looks Like We Made It, Say the Words All the Time, and See the Show Again. Some of his best story songs were here. It wasn't a single, but You Ought to Be Home with Me is one of my favorite songs by him. And Riders to the Stars is also great. And of course, there were 1, 2, 3 big hits on here. This four if you include Daybreak, but this is the studio version. This one's for You, Weekend in New England, and Looks Like We Made It. All came from this album. And either Say the Words or All the Time was a hit in UK for him. I forget which one. But this has always been one of my favorite albums by Barry. It came with a great lyric sleeve, with that wonderful statuette that made its debut on his prior album, Trying to Get the Feeling Again. This is, of course, an OG. I'm a Barry Manilow OG guy. Love the songs, love everything on it, and I know everybody's going, Barry Manilow, why? Deal, people. Number 8. This one's for you. Barry Manilow, 1976. Now we're going to get into the stuff that you're going to be like, wow, I didn't know TC had that in him. As we go through the list, because there's a lot of stuff on here you guys are going to be surprised about. Number 7. The Barry Manilow was a Columbia Records Club, by the way. Number 7 came out in 1976, but most of the big hits came in 1977. And it's a great album from start to finish. And he had a real run in that year with 3 big hits from this album. And would take a couple years before he would bounce back with 2 or 3 more hits after a new album in 1980. But this remains, I think, his biggest seller, and it is an absolutely terrific album from beginning to end. Number 7, Leo Sayer and Endless Flight. This has Hold On to My Love, You Make Me Feel Like Dancing, Reflections, When I Need You, No Business Like Love Business, I Hear the Laughter, Magdalena, How Much Love, I Think We Fell in Love Too Fast, and Endless Flight. This is the inner sleeve with photos and liner notes. He is on Warner Brothers. This is the Palm Tree label. Oh, no, this is the later one. Oh, yeah, because I didn't buy this until 79, I think, through the record club. So the Palm Tree's not there. And there's your RCA Record Club stamp. Of course, You Make Me Feel Like Dancing, one of the coolest songs ever. Both Leo and another artist, I've forgotten the name, had a hit with it in 2009 in Europe that was just really great remake. When I Need You and How Much Love. I think How Much Love is a great song. It didn't do as well as the other two, and I think it was great. But the whole album is fantastic. Leo is a great songwriter. He wrote most of this, and terrific stuff. Number 7, Leo Sayer, Endless Flight. Number 6 is probably going to surprise people, but I love jazz fusion music. I always have. I got into it in the 1980s, mostly. I had a few introductory steps in the 70s, and this was one of them. But I really fell in love with it in the 80s. I became a big fan of Dave Grusin, Kenny G, also later in the 80s. But this man, I don't own any albums by this man other than this one, and I never had it on album until a couple years ago when I bought it in a sale online. But I did have 3 or 4 of the songs on digital because I've loved it always and I played it always. It's truly a classic, and I think it's a diamond sales level album at this point. And it was the album that really truly launched him into superstardom, and rightfully so. Number 6, George Benson and Breezin'. This is the album that contains Breezin', which, if you don't know it, you probably do know Breezin'. You've heard it on sports shows, and Lifestyles Rich and Famous used to play it every now and then. This Masquerade, of course, was a huge hit for him. 6-4, Affirmation, So This Is Love, and Lady. I'm surprised I haven't picked up later stuff because I love George. I have tons of singles by him, but I don't have a lot of albums. This is the only album, actually. And Breezin' used to play all the time on those beautiful music stations I listened to that I've talked about on other shows. And This Masquerade was all over the pop radio stations. His version of that song is terrific. I still like the Carpenter's version the best, but his version is second. And there's a couple of other great versions out there, too, of that song. Number 6, 1976, George Benson and Breezin'. Number 5 is a band that I've always loved, and they really didn't get the attention or the recognition that they deserved. They had 2 or 3 pretty big hits, 5 or 6 minor hits, and their albums always sold fairly well. But they were always the pop act that cracked the rock radio area. You didn't see many pop acts, and by all means, these guys are a pop act with a country sound on some of their stuff and a southern rock sound on other songs. And you would hear them on the pop radio stations, but you would also hear album tracks on AOR stations, which was really unusual at the time. Not very many acts did both. Journey and Styx were mainly the other two, and they were huge on both arenas. These guys, not so much. They were much bigger on the pop chart than they were. I've picked up all of their albums, or most of their albums, in the last couple of years, having singles before, and having heard the albums on Spotify and such since I started streaming, because I love them. And I always think that they're just way underrated. Number 5, Firefall by Firefall. This was their debut album featuring You Are the Woman, Cinderella, and Livin' Ain't Livin', as the hype sticker says. Total album is It Don't Matter, Love Isn't All, Livin' Ain't Livin', No Way Out, Dolphin's Lullaby, Cinderella, Sad Old Love Song, You Are the Woman, Mexico, and Do What You Want. They would track to the rock album chart with later albums, particularly, and I don't remember which album it is, I think it's Elan, that has Strange Way on it. Strange Way was very popular on AOR, at least in Spokane, as well as the pop chart. Firefall, the pop has always, I loved the pop songs. You Are the Woman, which is on this album. Cinderella, to a lesser extent. Livin' Ain't Livin' is okay also. But Strange Way is my favorite song by them, and that'll be coming up. I'm sure we'll probably get to that album in a couple of years down the road. But I'm glad I finally picked all these albums up, because I love them all. I've loved them. They were to the back half of the 70s what Three Dog Night was to the early half of the 70s, and I adore them too. Really fantastic album, and a auspicious debut that foretold what would be coming in the future. Firefall from Firefall, number 5 on my list. At number 4 is an album I've only recently picked up on vinyl. I had it on cassette because it was sent to me by a friend. She used their music quite often to write with. And back in the late 80s, she sent me a copy of the album. And it has one of my favorite songs on it of all time, their version of it. And because there are certain instruments I will gravitate toward. I love a good guitar solo, particularly guitar-centric music like Joe Satriani, rather than rock bands, although Slash is, practically incomparable. I love a good saxophone. I was not a big Debbie Gibson fan until Foolish Beat came out with that wailing saxophone in the opening, which just sucked me right into the point where it ended up the number 1 song of the year on my chart. And I love Kenny G and Boots Randolph too. And I love synthesizers. Been a fan of Kraftwerk since the early 70s. Been a fan of Tangerine Dream since the early 80s when I first discovered them. And these guys have been a fan since 1988 or so, when I got that tape from my friend. And there was this album, and I played that tape and played that tape and played that tape. And when Adam had a copy on vinyl, I grabbed it because I love this album. From 1976, Synergy and Sequencer. This includes their incredible version of Classical Gas, also S-Scope, Chateau, Cybersports, Paradox Part A, Largo, New World Symphony, and Part B, Icarus, and Sequence 14 at the end. This is a gatefold. I think this is an OG press. I'm not sure. has the 1976 Passport Records date on it. Synergy is a band that I like some of the stuff of, and there's some things they do that I'm not crazy about. I can say the same thing about Kraftwerk. Tangerine Dream had me from hello, pretty much from the beginning. Synergy's got a few things that bug me, but overall, I love their music, and they're some of the top synthesizer music out there. And their synthesizer version of Classical Gas, which is possibly my all-time favorite song, I have so many different versions of that song, is amazing. And this album is amazing. If you have not heard it, I urge you to check it out. If you are a synthesizer music fan, there is none better than this album from 1976, Synergy and Sequencer. I'm going to get a drink. I have a feeling this is going to be interesting. Number 3 on my list was an album I was influenced by Harrington to buy. I love it. It's still still my very favorite album by the band, and it is their biggest seller, I believe, if you look at it in the notes. It's a classic. It was the album that really put them on the map. They'd had 3 albums before, I think. 2 studio albums and a live album. And this was the big breakthrough. Came out on my birthday in 1976. I would pick it up in 78 through Columbia Record Club, because in Harrington, you couldn't get away from this band. Everybody was obsessed with them. I was not. I enjoyed, pop stuff, Barry Manilow, Carpenters, ABBA, Teen Idol, Slave Garrett, and Christy and Jimmy McNichol, and so forth. But I do like my heavy metal in some cases, and this is one of them. So, shock of all shocks, number 3 for 1976, Destroyer from Kiss. This album is the pinnacle of 70s heavy metal. I don't know why I'm showing it. I'm pretty sure damn near everybody in the vinyl community has it. Detroit Rock City, King of the Nighttime World, God of Thunder, Great Expectations, Flaming Youth, Sweet Pain, Shout It Out Loud, Beth, Do You Love Me, and there's a hidden track, instrumental track on there too. Of course, the classic Kiss Army stuff right from the album. And Casablanca, their biggest seller, until Donna Summer came along. And she would give them a run for their money in the next couple of years. I don't have any other Kiss albums. Kim has tons of them. Kim is a huge Kiss fan. I have the 4 solo albums also, but I do not have any of the other albums. Kim has probably 15 or 20. She's a huge Kiss fan. And she's seen them live twice. She saw them both without the makeup back in the late 80s, early 90s, and with the makeup on their first tour with the makeup back on in 96, I think it was. I didn't go. She went with her best friend Stacy, who's also a Kiss head. And they had a blast. I know from when it comes to Kiss, I know they can do no wrong for Dylan over at the Record Spinner. Rightfully so. If you're into Kiss, they're fantastic. Dylan went on a great tour of the Kiss Museum in Las Vegas a couple months ago, and my wife was sitting there drooling at some of the stuff that was being shown. She is a rabid fan, and that album, it is one of the connections I have to Harrington even today, because everybody else had this album, and surprisingly, when I got it, I actually loved it, even though I wasn't that much into heavy metal until 79, 80, when I started getting more into some more metal and new wave. Number 3, Kiss, Destroyer. Surprise! Number 2, second best album of their career, I think. I named it on their influencers last year. Love this album from start to finish. I like the alternate versions of a couple of the songs on the singles that came out from it. And there's, again, this band can do no wrong. Although the last album, the new album, the first one in 40 years, isn't as cracked up as everybody else thinks it is. I mean, everybody else loves it. I like it. There's a couple of songs I really don't like very well. This album, I can't say that about. It is top notch from start to finish, and it is their biggest selling album in America. From 1976, ABBA, and Arrival. This includes When I Kissed the Teacher, Dancing Queen, My Love, My Life, Dum Dum Diddle, Knowing Me, Knowing You, Money, 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 That's Me, Why Did It Have to Be Me, Tiger, and Arrival. This features their only American #1 hit, Dancing Queen. I don't know why that was their only American #1 hit, because they were a great band to begin with. This again from Columbia House. There's the Columbia House under license. Nearly everything I have in the 70s is from Columbia House or RCA, because I didn't have a car after 79, and it was easier to order stuff than try to find albums and singles in Ritzville, Davenport, or have to go, God forbid, all the way to Spokane to get them. Once we moved from the coast of Washington, I had no access. Arrival is really great. Not only does it include Dancing Queen, Knowing Me, Knowing You, which is one of my favorite songs by them, and Money, Money, Money. This, I love That's Me, which is the album track, and I like the original version of Why Did It Have to Be Me. The original version is called Happy Hawaii, and it's on the flip side of the single of Knowing Me, Knowing You. It's not included on this album, which is a shame, because I love that song. And I love this album. I really do think this is their second best album, next to Super Trooper, or Voulez-Vous, I forget which one. It was one of those two, which were both fantastic also. ABBA's never done anything wrong as far as I'm concerned. And I will always love their music, and I will always play their music. From 1976, #2, ABBA and Arrival. Now, we've reached #1. There are those bands or acts that people have come to know me for as being a great proponent for. I have mentioned numerous times that my top 3 are Hanson, Carpenters, and Def Leppard. Jerry Rafferty is up there on that top 10 list. Joe Satriani, a number of other acts. And these guys, they, despite the fact that nobody really knows their music other than that one first hit single, which was all over the chart in the summer of 76, and all over the airwaves in the summer of 76, so much you could not get away from it, and now it's considered one of the cheesiest songs of the 70s. It isn't so much the songs as it is the people and their incredible voices. The harmonies are mind-blowing, and it has made me a fan for life. I have all 4 of their studio albums. I have their Christmas album, which came out in 1981. I have, or 1980. I just picked up the 2 solo CDs by John Carroll. I have earlier stuff by Bill and Taffy Danoff, both as Bill and Taffy and as Fat City. These guys can do no wrong for me. I love them. #1 album of 1976, Starland Vocal Band by Starland Vocal Band. John Carroll, Margot Chapman, Bill and Taffy Danoff doing Boulder to Birmingham, Baby You Look Good to Me Tonight, American Tune, Starland, California Day, War Surplus Baby, Starting All Over Again, Afternoon Delight, there's the one they're known for, Hail Hail Rock and Roll, and Ain't It the Fall. The harmonies are amazing. I don't know, there's certain bands that I'm attracted to for their harmonic quality. After Starland Vocal Band, I got heavy into Manhattan Transfer for the same reason. Love them. The voices here are so perfectly blended, and this, and on all 4 of their other albums, are so perfectly blended that it is, to me, the perfect album. Now, I put this on a tape and played it in school one day, and everybody was like, "Oh, get that off, it sucks, blah, 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 blah." Metalheads, pop fan. There you go. Their version of Paul Simon's American Tune is done completely a cappella. It is freaking incredible. In addition to Afternoon Delight. It also features two other singles, Hail Hail Rock and Roll and California Day, neither one of which got out of the bottom half of the Hot 100. And the best song on the album besides American Tune is Starland. Starland, with its lead vocal by then 19-year-old John Carroll, and harmonies, I think, by Margot Chapman, who would later become his wife for a number of years. Both couples were married and are now divorced, but are still friends. This is just an incredible album. I will always push Starland Vocal Band. Forget the terrible TV series. That wasn't their fault. That god-awful 1977 summer series that they did. Their musical segments were fine, but they obviously, weren't really into doing comedy, so David Letterman and a few other sketch comedians were doing the comedy, and it was only a half hour long, and it only was on for 4 weeks. Don't judge them on that. Judge them for the music. Judge them for the harmonies. Critics hate them, and I still haven't figured out why. When you listen to those harmonies, how can you not like them? Yeah, some of the music, some of the lyrics are cheesy, but they didn't write all of them. And most of the cheesy stuff, the really cheesy stuff, came on 4x4 from 1980 with their abominable whitewashed version of Everybody La Bamba, which I talked about on Influencers last year. But these guys, from left to right, John Carroll, Margot Chapman, Bill Danoff, Taffy Danoff, these guys make music that makes me happy anytime I listen to it. All four of theirs, Bill and Taffy's earlier stuff, I still need to get one of the Fat City albums. And of course, they first got fame singing on John Denver's Take Me Home Country Roads, and this is on John's label at the time, Windsong. It's now Windstar. They changed the name of it, but that's the album, and he remained friends with them till his death. Bill and Taffy's son Owen is also a musician. He was actually on American Idol a few years ago, and John Carroll was very popular in the 80s in their Washington D.C. They're all from Washington D.C. in the Washington D.C. area, and he released a couple of solo albums in the early 2000s, and I just managed to acquire them for a reasonable price. And oh my God, he hasn't changed. His voice hasn't changed a bit. It's freaking phenomenal how good those solo albums are. I still need to get one of the Fat City albums, and I have not been able to find anything solo from Margot Chapman. I know she's done some jazz work since she and John divorced in the 80s, but I don't know what she's done, and I can't find it. So if you know of Margot Chapman's work and can let me know where she's heard singing on what albums, I'd really love to know, because I love her voice, particularly on a song called Prism from their second album, Rearview Mirror. This album was produced by Milton Osland with Phil Ramone. Phil Ramone helped produce this album. Harmony people, try them, please. This album and Rearview Mirror are available on CD through Collector's Choice Music. I don't think it's out of print. I might be wrong. The second two albums you'll have to dig around in bargain bins for. And the Christmas album you can find on Discogs. I found it for a decent price last year and grabbed it. I didn't even know it existed till I found it on Discogs. And the other stuff they have out is magnificent. They are one of the bands I'm truly obsessed with, and this album is why. Number 1, 1976, Starline Vocal Band by Starline Vocal Band. And yes, Boston fans, I'm sorry they won the Grammy, and I think so are they. They never did recuperate from it. My top 10, once again. Number 10, The Kids from Caper by The Kids from Caper. Number 9, A Kind of Hush by Carpenters. Number 8, This One's For You, Barry Manilow. Number 7, Endless Flight by Leo Sayer. Number 6, Breezin', George Benson. Number 5, Firefall by Firefall. Number 4, Sequencer by Synergy. Number 3, Kiss, Destroyer. Number 2, Arrival by ABBA. And number 1, Starline Vocal Band by Starline Vocal Band. And that is 1976. Now, 1977 is going to be very interesting. 1977 was another musical watershed in my life. I found one of my true heroes of music in 1977. One of the biggest movies of all time came out in 1977. We moved again, although in the same city. We lived in 4 different houses over 5 years in Harrington. 4, 2, 3, yeah, 4 different houses. And every time my collection would start to grow. And as we get closer and closer to 1978 and 79, where I was really in high school and really spending money on records a lot, and it's going to be hard to go through those years and find 10, because there's so much good stuff. But I've enjoyed it, and I hope that you like it, and I hope you will check these out if you haven't heard it. Particularly those of you who have not heard Kids from Caper and you're fans of the Partridge Family or the Cowsills or, one of those groups. Check that album out. Don Kirshner was executive producer, and it's got some great stuff on it. That's 1976, folks. Thank you for subscribing if you already have, and if you haven't, please do. And if you would, please leave a comment. Love to know what you think of my choices. Oh, Stein vocal band, they suck. I know I'm going to get that from somebody. I know it. That's fine. I don't mind, because they're not everybody's taste. But I hope you'll leave a comment anyway, so I can get in touch with you and make new friends like I always enjoy doing. I hope you'll check out all my other shows on TKR Video Central, and they're all at 4 p.m. Eastern, except for Finding Your Music Mojo, which is every alternate Monday, on either my channel or Two Hip Chicks. Dawn and I talk about crazy things. This coming Monday, it will be on my channel, and we will be talking radio, and that's at 6 p.m. Eastern. And, of course, my daily Obscuria Vaults every day at 11 a.m. Until next time, as we track through the Wayback Machine to 1977 next time. For Vinyl Recall, I'm T.C. Kirkham. Ciao, baby.